Hey, what's up? What is this? Okay. I remember seeing issues of this as a kid, and of course, I got them at the used comic store for a quarter, so there weren't any kind of order. But there was this war story, The Lonely War of Captain Willie Schultz. This series was has almost kind of legend behind it. It was came out during the height of the Vietnam War era, and was actually canceled because a young man who decided to not uh, take his draft card and not go to the army cited this book as an inspiration. And apparently, Charlton Comics were the comics. They had a deal with the PXs, the Army bases and Air Force bases where they had comics. I think Rorschach even mentions getting American comics at an Air Force base somewhere in England. So this was a thing that the military pressured them to fire the writer. Now, I'm not sure if that's 100% correct, but at this point, who cares? It actually sounds like a cool story, and it's probably very possible. Okay? The Lonely War Captain Willie Schultz is interesting because it shows, especially in the time it came out, a view of World War II, which the more I look into it, I'm not talking about the history, I'm talking about the perception of World War II amongst people. Uh, it really, there really was more of a gritty kind of remembrance of it. It wasn't so good versus evil that you had in the propaganda films during the war. And then in the 70s, when you start to get a certain kind of narrative building up. In that time before, you get movies like The Longest Day, Kelly's Heroes, where the Germans are just portrayed, particularly by British writers, as being pretty formidable opponents and being very close to the British in many ways. Not so much the Americans, but that's a whole other story. Now, what is this about? In a nutshell, Willie Schultz, he's a captain in a armored corps, okay? First generation German American. So already there's people that don't like him because of that. And there's an incident where he's the son of a general, gets them into an ambush, and his unit gets wiped out. He gets angry enough to actually point a captured German Luger at him, which is where he gets into trouble because he's shot by a German with the same kind of caliber, but no one sees that, so they assume that he did it. And this dude, as you can see, has a real hard on for him. He never liked this guy, just like in Paths of Glory when that one sergeant sent one of the guys that actually did go forward in the battle to be executed for cowardice. This guy's doing the same thing. He's convicted, and he's gonna be hung. And then, in a very fugitive type scenario, he escapes. Basically, what's he gonna do? Where is he gonna go? If he goes back to his own American forces, he's a dead man. Now, of course, the device of him being first German generation German American is helpful. Okay, Willy Franz actually is also German American. It helps him to infiltrate the Germans, and I like how he does it, where he's like, he doesn't know what he's gonna do. He just needs to survive in the moment, and so he hooks up with the Germans because he can't go back to the Americans. And then you get the writing, which really humanizes the enemy, which I argue is more common than you think in these stories. Okay? Your whole conception of the enemy has changed. In reality, they are men much like your own. In their last moments, in their time of despair and pain, they do not shout Heil Hitler or Fatherland. Instead, they call for someone by the name of Mama or Hilda, loved ones who can't do a thing to help them in their time of anguish. Okay? This series is pretty bleak, pretty dark. The constant theme of it is Willie realizing that he actually likes a lot of the Germans, okay? But constantly is in between. Obviously, he's trying to sabotage them, and he's trying to not kill other Americans while he's with them, and it creates a huge amount of conflict. Like when the commander wants him to run over this bazooka team. He tries to do the best he can to minimize casualties on either side, and all it ends up doing is failing utterly, and everybody dying, and Willie ending up alone. Very, very grim series. Okay, in the beginning, this is the first issue. My friend BX got this for me online. The issues I had as a kid, I couldn't find. They disappeared through the vagaries of time. There was one issue I remember with these young German kids fighting on a hill, and at this point, the character is working with a bunch of Italian partisans. So you know what that means. They're commies. And he tries to tell the kids to surrender. And he asks the kids why they're fighting. And the kids explain, like, what are your... I remember he asked in that one issue, which I don't have here, to the kid, like, why are you fighting? Like, what do your parents think of this? And the kid's like, parents? I don't have any parents. My parents died in an air raid like 2 weeks ago. I have no parents. Okay. Well, and of course, it doesn't end well, that issue. None of the things end well, and that's one of the dark things about it. So now I found this recently. This is about as much of a collected Willie Schultz edition that you can find. Okay, and not all of the stories are Willie Schultz. These are all Will Franz stories that he wrote. There's other characters in here, but mainly this is Willie Schultz. There's apparently, I believe, a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo, I forget which. They're going to collect all this, and they're going to have the original ending that the writer planned. Okay, like I said, the writer got kind of let go, and the ending was that he intended. Well, the original ending is going to be done. Obviously, Sam Glanzman has passed away, but it's going to be done by Wayne Van Zandt. Hopefully, that will come out at some point. I'll try to get my hands on it. But I found this. This is pretty much the biggest collection of Willie Schultz stories you have. Very cheap paper. These are the guys that published the Simon Gertie thing. ACG. And very kind of low rent. But you know what? Low rent is better than no rent, right? So you have scenes here. Well, I'll get into, like, for example, he makes friends with the big bully guy who turns out to really like him. And at the end, what is it? Let's see. Some of these are in order. There's a scene here where the Germans get captured. He actually has to escape because instead of he can't let the Americans know who he is because he's going to be executed. And one of his friends comes in and he says, "Hey, Captain Schultz," and he has to run. Okay? And he goes to actually free the Germans, and they don't want to go. They're like, "Yeah, we're sick of this war. We're done." Okay, and. Oh, it's better than being in Russia, right? He's like amazed, bewildered. Here was the enemy wanting to stay, and you, an American, must flee because it's the Americans that want to kill him. Then you had this tragic thing where the friend he made, and he's back in here. He actually recognizes him, and he sees that his friend is actually an American. He hooks up with the Americans again, and he tells him, "My God, Tiny, this big dude," he tells him, get out, but the Americans won't let the Germans get out. They keep shooting at them, so they have to stay in the tank that's on fire. And you see this guy is just like, he thinks that this guy is a traitor. He was a traitor, and he blows himself and the crew up. He dies, right? What is it? Your best friend has died, cursing you. It's over. So now this just continues on and on. He at one point meets a German woman who's temporarily blinded and has no idea that he's an American. He saves her from a bunch of Arab raiders. One of the Arabs that were not helping the Germans, apparently, okay? Because you're going to help the people that are fighting against the people that have oppressed and occupied you, right? Anyway, and she starts to see him, and the Germans, she lets her know that, yeah, this is an American helmet. The guy that was with you was not German because he was speaking German to her. Okay, she pops up later. Okay, you have more things now. He ends up helping a bunch of British commandos. Okay, like an action war movie. And there's a scene here where one of the British commandos throws a satchel charge at the nearest tent, which is an army tent, and then Willy, Franz, and Glanzman proceed to show the horror of all these wounded men being burned to death in a fiery holocaust. Okay? Nurses, patients dying and screaming. And Willy totally horrified because this is one of his other friends that he had who basically dies. Right? He's about to be executed, and then the woman remembers him and she saves his life. Okay, while these British dudes go to their death, and even this scene here, right, where the British guys, commandos, are like, "Yeah, we got caught." Right? War isn't what is it in reality. It's not plainly murder and violence on a large scale. Right? So these British dudes get executed. Every story ends like this, very downbeat. Right? He's in a POW camp. You get a real sad story here with these British pilots and the one dude. You get the story here where the British bomb what they think is a supply train. It turns out to be a prison train. Okay? The pilots learned to their horror later that they had bombed the German prison train by mistake. This is a straight-up anti-war comic. Okay? And here he is now. Willy's in between looking for food. He stabs a German to death for a crust of bread. It's just, this is how it really, this is really Schultz. This is such an evocative cover. Okay? Everything the guy tries to do eventually backfires. Like with the German kids that were fighting in the issue I mentioned later. Everything this man tries to do to minimize casualties, to do the honorable thing, ends in failure and almost everyone around him dying. Okay, now apparently the series ended where he just ends up on the Eastern Front and retreats to Germany, and he doesn't even know what he is anymore. He speaks German, he thinks in German, but there is kind of a happy ending supposedly where him and the German woman, the daughter of a general, come together, and the guy pursuing him decides to have a change of heart. That's the original ending. I don't know what the actual ending is going to be when Wayne Van Zandt finally finishes it. It'd be very interesting to see, but you could just see that, just the Vietnam era dejection, and of course, like I said, Franz got fired for this very anti-war gritty story. And now there's two other series that Willy Franz had written and that same Glanzman had drawn. The Iron Corporal, I don't know too much about this. I think this is an American fighting with the British in obviously in the Pacific Theater. Okay, the one guy keeps saying "ruddy" all the time, and I don't think the guy is supposed to be. He doesn't talk like a British person, and apparently he has like iron ribs. I think that like he had his rib cage removed and replaced with iron ribs or something. So it makes him a little tougher. But these Iron Corporal stories are almost like horror stories. Okay? They're like almost Edgar Allan Poe meets the Pacific Theater. None of these end well. He starts hallucinating about death coming for him. The Japanese are shown to actually be pretty good fighters, just like the Germans. Okay? So the Iron Corporal is just, it's almost like a psychological horror war story with this character. And the other series he did, Devils Brigade, is actually very weird. You have British and Americans working together. You have the Centurion tank, right? This is the British tank that was designed to finally beat the Tiger head to head. For some reason, they're in North Africa, which is not chronologically correct, but obviously the Israelis used these tanks later to good effect against the Soviet T-55s and the war with the Syrians and the Egyptians in '67. Very good tank, the Centurion. The British guy is always obsessed with going after Rommel, and he's got some of these American guys mixed in with the British guys. The villain, who's actually not really a villain, the German character in this guy, right? I forget, he got like a smiling name. Like, this German dude is no joke. He's shown to be a really capable fighter. Okay, they blow up his tank. He gets on a bike, and he actually does it in. Like I said, the Willy Franz stories, the Germans are formidable, just like the Japanese. Like, they win battles. They beat the Americans and the British just as much as they get beaten. And yeah, smiling Albert Kruger. He's like the nemesis of this. And he's a bad dude. He gets on a motorcycle and knocks out tanks with potato masher grenades. So that's interesting to see that. It's very interesting, the Devils Brigade. It's, what can I say? The lonely war of Captain Willy Schultz. We're all going to be in a very lonely war for the rest of our lives. But you know what? That's the challenge as a man that you face. And That's all I gotta say about that. Later.